First of all, I want to thank Carol for coming and joining us today. I also want to thank all of you for joining us and being here. We're really excited. This is our first ever Women in Tech Week, and this is an amazing group. I'm so excited to host them in front of you. Carol is a really good friend of mine. She's sometimes my second mom, and she's been a huge mentor in my life and in my career. She has great advice. One of the people that I always go to when I'm having an issue or I just need some guidance. That makes me so happy. I'm really honored to be interviewing her in front of all of you, share her advice and wisdom that she's given me throughout the years, pass it along to our group here at Dish and Sling. Feel free to jump in with any questions throughout. We are going to have a Q&A at the end for 10 to 15 minutes, so keep that in mind as well. And if you get one thing out of this today, I want you guys to take away that to grow our own careers, we also need to promote and support the women around us and really lift up our fellow female cohorts in addition to our own careers. So let's get started.
Great.
Oh, I am Alex. My name is Alex. I currently work for Sling as a art director on the creative team. So Carol, I'm going to open it up to you to tell us a little bit of background information on yourself.
Great, thanks for having me here. Actually, before I start, as I was driving over, I was thinking, I don't talk a lot. I do talk a lot, and I talk a lot about subject matter presentations, but I don't talk about myself in this manner very often. And I certainly hope to provide some inspiration to all of you this afternoon, but more importantly, I would like to give you practical insights and advice. So if I gloss over something or, it just doesn't make sense, please ask, make me go deeper. Because, again, speaking to helping women advance in their careers, I really want to dig deep about just the practical stuff about, how do you do it? So we'll just start way back, I think, with early background. And again, obviously preparing for these questions, I think when I kind of that teenager age or whatever, what I aspired to be was an executive assistant to a president. And, kind of looking at that and examining that, I'm sure there's some in the room, I'm sure you all know them. They are very powerful people. They may not have the authority next to their name, but they certainly have the authority and the presence in the office space. And so as a young person, I wanted that level of power. I grew up in a household, I had a sister, and my parents definitely encouraged me that I could be anything I wanted to be a fireman, be a fire person, be a doctor. What they didn't have in their vocabulary and truly they just didn't have it, is they didn't know to tell me that I could be the president of, fill in the blank. They didn't know that I could be the chief surgeon. They didn't know that I could be the superintendent. So I think that was that kind of little miss that, so as I was growing through my career, I didn't really know that I could be the president per se.
So that's a little bit about who you are. What is your family life like? What does that look like at home?
Today's
back
family
then
life.
and
back
today.
Okay. So I'm a Denver native, and I grew up in Southwest Denver, went to public schools. I have 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. They're all young adults contributing to society today, like Alex is. They're 29, 26, and 24. I have 2 granddaughters. I have a 4- and 1-year-old granddaughter, and I'm married to an aerospace engineer at Lockheed Martin, and so he's kind of the, straight line, linear thinker, and I'm the all over the crazy place entrepreneurial thinker. So that's kind of the balance in our household.
Awesome. And can you tell us, you've spoken to me about this personally, and we've had conversations, but can you tell the group, mind sharing with them your education background?
Absolutely. So I actually went to the University of Colorado, and I started college when I was 17, so I was a little young. felt like you had to know what you wanted to be when you grew up. I had somebody in my life that had been that was an accountant and a successful CPA, so I went into the business school through the education program, or I'm sorry, the business school to be an accountant. I'm not a detail person, and accounting takes a lot of detail, and so I actually dropped out of CU halfway through my junior year. So I do not have a college degree. I have a lot of people who, want to hear where I got my MBA or whatever, fill in the blank. Certainly have regrets around that, and yet there's a whole lot of ways that we can gather an education, and I think we're starting to see that back again, where you can go to trade schools, you can, a 4-year degree is not the only thing to advance yourself in the workplace.
Okay, so let's move forward to today. You're the CEO of your own company, Tatonka Capital Corporation. Can you tell us about your organization and your role there?
Well, the CEO, the buck stops at my desk. So I think, again, on the questions I was preparing for, it was generally, what's your responsibility? Everything is my responsibility. Tatonka Capital is a public finance firm. So most of you know about municipal bonds or treasury bills is the way the federal government borrows debt, but there's a trillion-dollar industry that you don't necessarily know about that finances every little widget that municipalities use in everyday life, from the furniture in this room to building buildings like this. And so my company is a lower middle market little niche player. We do transactions that are $5 million and under, so most of the larger banking. And so my competitors are every large institution in the country that does, or the world that does, public finance in the US. But again, we fill a little teeny niche. And then we also have a subsidiary that we started 3 years ago focused on charter school management. So we have an education branch. And what connects the dots between those things is they all are, the revenues coming in are coming in from government procurement transactions. So education is a service, whether it's your neighborhood public school, the public charter school, or a private school, it's still a service. You've got to draw customers, and that repayment's coming in from a government agency.
Awesome.
Boom, that was fast. So
yeah, you've got it in
boom.
there. And how big is Tatonka?
Today, with the public finance group, and again, we're a small middle market company, but we're 85 people right now. The finance company, I started out as 3 people. I was actually employee number 2 because I didn't get a paycheck in the beginning. So my office manager was employee number 1 because she did get a paycheck. And the finance company has been as large as probably 40 people at one point in time. We also had a consumer finance company where Tatonka Credit Corporation, we financed horse trailers, high-end motorcycles, and high-end pianos. And we can talk about the connection between those in Q&A if you want.
Yeah, that's a little bit
I'm
far
an
apart.
entrepreneur.
You got to do what you got to do sometimes, And how big is your budget? I mean, it's a smaller company, so it's not going to be as big as someplace like this. And how do you manage that?
Sure. Well, so the company's, this is our 25th year. It was started in 1993. And again, getting around to really some of the nuts and bolts practical stuff, I wanted to share. I made a $20,000 investment to start the company with a partner who also contributed $20,000. So our first year budget was $40,000, no paycheck to me type thing. We started off with banking lines of about $500,000 that grew to a peak in 2012 probably of $85 million. And then there was a debt crisis, and I'm in debt financing if I didn't mention that part of the finance. And so now we're back in around probably the $10 million range. So again, still qualifies as a lower middle market company.
Yeah, so 25 years. Amazing.
We're still standing.
I can't believe my whole life, well, most of my life, pretty much almost my whole life, you've been running Tatonka, which is crazy, as far as I know, from what I remember growing up. How did you take all this on 25 years ago?
So I think, one of the questions that I prepared for is, how did you decide to start your own company? What was it? I actually had gone to work for Bank One, which is now J.P. Morgan Chase. And so I was in a division of a large, corporation. And I had been named Salesperson of the Year. I think it was 1992, big woohoo award at the national convention, blah, blah, blah. 2 months later, I got called into my boss's office, and they told me I was making too much money and they were cutting my territory. So I was not happy. I was pretty insulted, frankly, by the company that I had actually loved. I loved my job. And I had a former boss who had actually sold a division to the company, had a non-compete, and had earned his earn-out and moved on. Here that I was out shopping for a job, again, it was just so disheartening to have gotten that message. And he just frankly approached me and said, hey, let's start a company. And so there was literally no business plan. I did have a book of business, so I had a customer base that, customers certainly come for a company, but they stay for people. I think even today, the interaction with the people make the difference. So we just sort of jumped, and I think, again, on the most practical sense, I thought I would regret not giving it a shot. Worst case, I could do it for 6 months. Now, I did have a husband who had a steady paycheck, and at that point in our life, I was not the head of household as far as the income earner, so nobody was relying on my paycheck to make the mortgage. But we went for it.
So,
and, I like to add, sorry, because I shared that I have 3 kids. In a way, I have 4 children because Tatonka was born between my second and third child. So when I quit my job, my paying job, did I mention that I had a paying job? I didn't actually know I was pregnant with my third child. So I was pregnant. It's worked out. But yeah, you can do it all. I mean, we can. Yes. I did freak out, and I have, this story that, our first offices were on Larimer Square because downtown was dirt cheap in 1993. It's just before they broke ground for Coors Field. So we had really awesome office space, dirt cheap. And I was driving literally on I-25. I was coming down I-25 southbound. I live in Parker, and I was in that bend between Broadway and kind of Santa Fe, bumper-to-bumper traffic. I'm on the phone to my husband on this huge car phone thing that was built in at the time. And again, he's at Martin Marietta, and I'm telling him, that I'm jumping out of my skin, and I'm going to tell you this intimate detail that you can tell everybody. He's like, honey, you quit a big job, and Martin Marietta has healthcare or mental health services, so you can go talk to somebody. And I swear, you guys, again, I had 2 children, so it's not like I didn't know what it was like to be pregnant. But I don't know, it was just the light bulb went off. I'm like, oh my God, I'm pregnant, and I was pregnant. So yes, I was freaking out. And I didn't think a banker would loan money, to a pregnant woman, but they did.
So you got a lot of support from your husband at home during this time. Tell us about that balance and kind of how that looked like at home, because you had 2 kids.
Right.
You have a third one coming. You're trying to get a loan and start your own business all at the same time. How did that change your home life
Sure.
and that work-life balance?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question, Alex. So, and I know we're going to talk about Lean In later on, and Sheryl Sandberg talks about who your life partner is a big part of her story. You know, and I don't even know where this came from. So, please know that we were just making our way going forward. There was no guidebook, but we did approach me starting Tatonka as a partnership. Not that my husband was going to be physically in the company or the business itself, but that he was going to be kind of the support mechanism to whatever it was that I was going to have to do. And he, as an aerospace engineer, he worked on satellite launches, and so in our household, we would do things that we would call launch mode, because he would have these intense periods of time where he was working 24/7. And probably the longest period was maybe 90 days. And so just sort of as a household, we would prepare for him to be in launch mode. Well, so we sort of approached launching Tatonka in that way. We went into launch mode, and we just divvied, we got out a spreadsheet and divvied up the jobs. And for most of my kids' younger life, I was responsible for the morning, get out the door part of the day, and he was responsible for the pick them up from wherever they were end part of the day. Actually, the reason I got to know Alex and her family is because my husband was sitting next to her mom at the dance studio where they were all doing ballet or whatever. So really, my husband Eric is the connection that brought us all together. Yeah, so we divvied it up, and sometimes it wasn't working, and we'd have to redivide, and but it was a partnership.
That's awesome, and I think it's really important for some of the women here to hear that, especially when we're trying to pursue our careers and be leaders at work, and sometimes at home you forget what that looks like with your partner. Can you give us a little bit of advice on how you manage that on the day-to-day? What is it, something you guys constantly had to work on? Did it come naturally?
Well, I wouldn't say it came naturally. I think, like everything, it kind of cycles. And I think that's also what happens in workplaces. I mean, I think we all get to go through periods where we love our job, and then something shifts, and you're not that thrilled about the workplace. Everything ebbs and flows, and certainly our household ebbed and flowed in that way. And I would say that, again, it's looking back, it sounded like it was smooth. You had to sometimes just jump up and down and make yourself heard. What we would do is we would adjust, is probably the bottom line. But, there are plenty of arguments and fights, and probably one of my biggest irritations, if you will, with my husband, who's not here to defend himself, is that he was in charge of lunches at the time, and he was kind of there. His job was more 9 to 5. He works on the secured side, or he's a spy satellite guy, basically. So his day ended when he left the office, whereas mine's 24/7. And so he was more responsible for their education, basically the field trips, all that stuff. It was him. And I think Sam, didn't have her lunch for some field trip, and the school calls, there's no lunch, we're going to make it, you're a bad mother, you're a bad mother, you're a bad mother, is what I heard. I was furious, because I figured that all the other moms were going to assume that I'm the one who didn't make lunch when it was Eric's job to make lunch. And so, there is a lot of this, guilt. I guess one thing that I'll say about mommy guilt, working mom guilt, is nobody's happy if the mom's not happy. I think that is pretty true. We set the tone in our household most often. And if you're not feeding your own soul, it doesn't matter which path you pick. It doesn't matter if I know plenty of women who have stayed home and are miserable, and so then their kids are not like thriving happy. My kids survived me working 24/7. They're pretty happy kids, and I think that flowed off of my feeding my soul, even though it meant time, away from them. So.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's home life and work life. They're so different, and yet at the same time, you have to manage them both. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Alex's mom is a kick-ass female leader, by the way. So she grew up in a household that was very dynamic.
It was very similar. So to me, I think it's really good to hear some of the guilt and whatever come out, because I didn't. that was all just normal to me. Normal life. I didn't know my mom had any guilt. I'm sure there's plenty of times my dad forgot to pack our lunch.
She has tons of guilt.
Well, good thing. I know your children. I know us, me and my sister. We don't see any of that. So you guys are doing good. So you face challenges at home, but I know that you face challenges in your business as well. Can you tell us about some of those challenges? How do you manage that? How do you overcome that?
Yeah, great. Thanks. Because one of the things that Michelle and I had talked about a little bit is just, if you're exploring, what's your next step in your career, if you wanted to branch out. So a couple of things. I'm going to start with the worst thing that's happened to me so far. There was a global debt crisis. And, again, I'm this little middle market company that has zero impact in the market, in general. Yet I do, I trail the market. So whatever is happening eventually catches up to me. And so the 2008 crisis caught me probably around 2012 and then into 2014. And so just on the most practical, level, what I do, I explored bankruptcy in 2014. And, it feels like your baby. I mean, you've done everything to survive it. I'm take something down to what is my worst case scenario. And so I just literally, I explored what corporate bankruptcy was going to look like with a trusted legal advisor. And then separately from that, I explored what personal bankruptcy would look like with a trusted legal advisor. And what that did for me, and again, I can give different examples of that, bankruptcy being the worst one. Once I know, what's it going to look like? Am I going to lose my home? Am I going to, never be able to get a bank loan again? Once I knew what that looked like, then as I was making my business decisions, I can go from, okay, worst case, here's what's going to, if I screw up, here's what's going to happen. And I can, here's how I'll survive it. So it's tearing it down. And everybody obviously, looks at things differently. But for me, just figure out how bad can it get, and then everything else is better than that. And then I have one other just sort of experience, again, as you're making your way through your career. So I was relatively young. I was 30 when I started Tatonka. And I have hired a bunch of people older than me, especially between my 30s and my 40s. People that I admired, people that I perceived to be industry experts, the whole range. Some super smart, some that turned out to be not as smart as I expected them to be. But I had this one experience. We had the Tatonka credit business, the consumer finance business, which I didn't personally have any expertise in except for operationally. And I had hired this guy away from he was a bank president. He was a regional bank president. Sounded really big deal to me. I think, I was probably 34. He was probably 42. I don't even know. I can't remember what the challenge was that was facing us, but he was sitting in my office, and I actually thought that he was going to cry. And I remember just, you know how you got the voice talking in your head while the conversation. I remember thinking, I don't know what to do. I hired you to know what to do. I have no clue what to do. What I learned from that experience was when you feel that frozen, immobile, oh my gosh, the sky is crashing down. What I do is I put it aside. I don't go on the walk or whatever. What I do is I look at my to-do list and I do the simplest, tiniest, nothingness thing. Maybe at that point in my life, it might have been, whatever, schedule a doctor's appointment for one of the kids, or, something. It has necessarily nothing to do with work or the challenge or whatever. It's the act of moving forward that will break kind of the roadblock. And so anyway, that's what I still do today. You'll get stuck. You just, perseverance. Keep going.
I need to remember to do that sometimes. Just move one thing forward.
Doesn't matter what it is.
So let's talk about, not only did Carol start her own business 25 years ago, she's been involved in multiple nonprofit organizations throughout. So managing her business as well as managing being in those organizations. She's a part of YPO, which for those of you who don't know is the Young Presidents Organization, multiple CEOs from all over the world. They have 25,000 members, I think now, and it's over 130 countries. So it's an international organization, and Carol was a part of that and is a part of that. Tell us about that experience.
Okay, great. Yeah, YPO is a super fantastic organization. If you ever have an opportunity or you know a younger business leader, you basically have to be a CEO of a minimum size company before the age of 45. It was before the age of 40 when I joined. I think today you have to have run a company of $12 million US in revenue, which is, you know, kind of the baseline of being larger than a small business. So for me, and board participation in general is something I want to talk about. If you're looking to how do you branch out or you don't really know how, volunteer for a board. And again, it doesn't really matter what, I mean, it needs to interest you, but it doesn't have to be, you know, the finance leaders of America or whatever. My first board experience was with the Cherry Creek Soccer Association. And I don't know, I think I was like 26 years old, and I was just I was coaching kids soccer, and somebody, you know, roped me in, and I thought, okay. And the thing about getting on any type of governing board for a not-for-profit, as again you're trying to make your way through your own career, is it gives you a chance to observe formal governance processes. It's the same process that Dish's board of directors is using. I mean, the problems are probably differently challenging, but nonetheless the process itself and the roles are the same. And I think it does two things specifically. One, it gives you a place to practice, not in front of your boss or your employer as a leader. And two, I think one of the big things is you probably will learn the stuff you don't want to do as a leader, because unfortunately you get a lot of examples of, wow, I'm never going to behave that way, or I'm not going to do that thing. So board service is huge. I also found many a customer by just being on a board. A direct phone call, a cold call in is super hard, but when you're sitting next to the president of XYZ Corporation and they hear what you're doing, and then they call you or ask, you know, their point person to call you, it's a whole different sales cycle. So, but back to Young Presidents Organization, my business is very U.S. centric because it's U.S. public finance, but YPO being a global organization sort of presented the world. And because I'm a small company, I also didn't have a lot of internal ability to do things like this, to do things like Alex is doing and stretching herself. Stretching myself in front of the 8 employees or even the 40 wasn't a pull over time. So I started getting involved in YPO, and our local chapter, the original chapter here, is celebrating its 60th anniversary this year, actually. And I was the first female chapter chair of this chapter. And the year that I was chapter chair, we won best chapter in the world chapter, and there's 450 chapters out there. So it gave you a chance to really stretch your leadership skills. And the peer group are all CEOs. Liberty Media is in my chapter. Coors is in my chapter. So that's the type of thing, you know, that really pushed me to go beyond. And so then I also became the network chair. We have a women's business network. So I was the chair of the YPO Women's Business Network, where we also won the International Network Award, which was cool.
That's awesome. And speaking of the Women's Network, that kind of led you into meeting Sheryl Sandberg and being on the team of advisors to launch Lean In Circles. Tell us about that.
Thanks. So one of the questions, I think, again, from Michelle was, well, how did you meet Sheryl Sandberg, or how did you get, okay, you guys, right place, right time. I was lucky. I love the definition of lucky is when opportunity meets preparedness. I was the chair of the YPO Women's Business Network, and Sheryl was a member of YPO, and we have a program that's basically small groups, and she asked YPO to advise on how she was going to create her Lean In Circles, which is based under it's based off of YPO's Forum program, which is our small group. And so really I was the person sitting in the seat that when they called in, it's like, Carol, take this phone call, basically. The experience was super fun. It's probably the first real experience where I was at the beginning of something that went globally. YPO was doing fine before I got to join. It was a bunch of people sitting around in a room deciding how the heck they were going to pull it off. There's nothing, obviously she has resources, but she had a vision, and it takes somebody physically doing the work. So she gathered about 15 advisors, and they divvied up the tasks and started down a path. And I don't know how many Lean In circles she has now, but it's thousands and thousands. So.
There's 37,000 members currently across 160 countries, which is very impressive. Yeah. And you were there at the beginning.
It's pretty cool.
Which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So what were some of the themes when you were talking about the Lean In circles and coming up with, this global Lean In circles?
Okay, I think kind of the core of it, and again, we're talking about supporting women in advancing in leadership at whatever level that is. I think I'm going to quote something Hillary Clinton used, which was, "It takes a village." Lean In circles really are helping you create your own little village. I had one that happened naturally with a group of girlfriends, but I think that's not necessarily the norm. So that really the basis for it is to provide a place where you can have a dialogue and share those big challenges that are going through your head, and then also, though, get really frank feedback. So these small groups, both inside of YPO and Lean In, they're based on a selfish tension, and it's this kind of interesting, weird thing. So when you join, you basically, you're there for yourself. The whole point of providing that time is so that you get something out of it. But the thing is, if I don't give, then Alex is going to, say this is a waste of her time and quit. So there's this natural tension that takes place where you have to be probably more selfish than you are in a normal day, and yet you're also more giving than you might normally be in this closed, confidential circle, because that's how you keep the circle together. So it's about a village.
It's about a village. It's been 6 years since the launch of Lean In Circles. What does Lean In mean to you today?
So I'm not involved directly. I still get the bulletins, I think maybe a week before if they launch a new, whatever it is they're doing. They were going onto university campuses, whatever. So I still get the advisor pre-launch notice. But just in general, I think it's nice to know that there's a place. Actually, if I'm doing some mentoring or advising, there's a place that people can go as a resource. And I think I talked to Alex a little bit. I think that might be something that this group looks into. Not for everybody, but I think it might be a good addition to some. And I'm not selling Lean In. I think it's a fantastic resource. Why not take advantage of it?
So one thing we also see a lot in our day-to-day lives is the role women play in C-suite roles. especially in the Fortune 500 space, we've seen quite a few leave recently. The most recent, Indra Nui of Pepsi, she left a few weeks ago. I'm sure in your experience at your level of business, you see a lot more. What are your thoughts on how we keep women in these C-suite roles?
Okay, so I loved this question. It is definitely not something that I think about on a daily basis. So one, it sent me, Googling what's happening out there, because I don't do that for my day job. So these are, just my personal opinion. I am not personally concerned about women coming and going from the C-suite right now. Let's say women that are in their 50s or older. I think, which is my generation, I think that I think we're decently represented, frankly. And this is a differing opinion from some of my female counterparts, but I think we have a decent representation in the C-suite level based on the women who put themselves out there to get to the C-suite. I mean, I don't have a single time when somebody said, oh, Carol, please come be on this pedestal. You have to go for it. So I think it's a decent representation. And also, I would just keep in mind that my generation, we were often the only woman in a room. I mean, obviously, it's the Women's Network, so there's supposed to be a lot of women. But in general, I doubt that you women are I'm sure rarely you're the only woman in the room now. I would say that I was the only woman in the room at least 98% of the time until I hit my mid-40s. And I think it has changed everywhere now. But I really do think that it's the millennial generation is the one that has moved through colleges that does have women graduating or working towards leadership positions. Not in mass, but in numbers that have some weight to it and some presence to it. So I did make me think, okay, I will be worried about it if in the next 10 years we don't see another generation or half generation of women that are moving into those levels. But I'm going to bring up the recommend a woman thing. So during my the chairmanship for the Women's Network in YPO is a 2-year position, which gives you some time to actually get some legs under it. And I was, frankly, upper middle class white girl from Denver, Colorado. So I went into that position thinking, oh, come on, there's not that much struggle out there. But as the network chair for a global organization, I did, become enlightened of what women in other countries, whether it's just, it's still social mores that are holding them down, their family, whatever. So it did open my eyes to there was a bigger struggle than I certainly ever had. So one of the programs that we put in place during my chairmanship, we just called it Recommend a Woman. And what struck me is that, if Alex would call me up and say, Carol, do you have any attorney? I need an attorney for blah, blah, blah to sit on this board or to take this general counsel position or whatever. I'd go through my contacts and I would very sincerely find her 4 people. 1 might be a woman and 3 would be guys, because my contact list is full of all those men that were in the room with me for the previous 20 years. And so, and then I would figure that 5 other people did the same thing. And so what would happen is 40 names would come forward and 4 would be women and the rest would be men. And it's not because anybody was trying to get, there was nothing nefarious about it. It was literally math and statistics. And so we ran a program that just said, you know what, we're only going to put women's names forward. So the person next to me, whether they're a man or a woman, can put whatever names they're going to put forward, but I'm going to dig out 4 female names for you so that I can at least have that pool of 40 people have a higher probability, I'm going to take it from 10% to maybe 25% that a woman's name might rise to the top. And I'm not a quota person, that it's hard on me to even say quota, and yet I do think because of that experience that are times where we have to set just good intentions aside and put some rules in place to change society's, path. And then I'd like us to, hopefully good intentions will be enough and we can get rid of those rules.
I think that's great advice. Supporting your women along with you, recommending women that are around you, move those numbers forward. I think that's a really great way to start it at, the individual level, and hopefully build to the masses.
I'm going to add, because obviously there's a lot of guys in the room. Thanks for coming. The YPO Women's Network also had, it was open to anybody who wanted to join. And, the whole point here is you're going to have wives, you have mothers, you may have daughters. It's about moving our society forward. We can go into politics and pay gaps and all of that stuff, but really we just want equality. That's
Yep.
all.
At the end of the day, that's all we're trying to pursue here. So let's talk about mentorship. How has that played a role in your life and starting your career?
So I definitely had mentors as a young person. I often, when we started Tatonka, I had an advisory board, really just people that I admired, that I asked to volunteer their time for me. And as life moved on and things flip-flopped and I was the grown-up in the room, I've been a mentor and advisor to a wide variety of people. I think that mentoring has, I don't think you need a mentor, all the time in your career, but I think if you feel, stuck or you just sort of have that energy that you want to shift something, I think finding a mentor, is a good way to do that and help bounce ideas off. I will say as the mentee, I didn't always do what my mentor thought was the best thing. As the mentor, I think as an employer, I don't necessarily expect somebody to do, if they ask me how to do something and they see it differently, it's just to provide advice. I will share that I, never had anybody approach me and say they'd like to mentor me. Again, I always had to ask, so if you don't ask the question, you won't get the answer. And I do believe that it's on the mentee. It's your responsibility to schedule the meetings, to set aside the time. One thing, depending again where you are in your career, I think that you might have people around you where maybe you did ask once and they said, yeah, call, get on the schedule, whatever. What I tell people, and this is, whether it's just people that want to meet with me, it's customers, it's vendors, whatever, not my customers, but people that are trying to sell me something. I often have the best of intentions, and truly, it's just my workday life that got in the way, and I tell people to bug me until I tell them to stop calling me or stop emailing me. I mean, obviously not necessarily daily, but I welcome that, okay, Carol, I'm checking in with you next week. I welcome that because my calendar is crazy, and that helps me. I will tell you if I don't want to meet with you, and I think that most executives are like that. They'll tell you. So, yeah, don't be shy.
And then one thing we've seen in our careers and, some of the speakers and women's network events that we join on the daily, we've seen that men do play a role in supporting and mentoring women in their careers. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh, yeah, let's see. I don't know that I differentiated. Probably most of my mentors were men, not, I don't think that for me personally, gender played a role. Certainly there are women that stood out that just set examples, whether they knew it or not, that let me know, oh gosh, you can do it all. I don't think I could spend 3 hours talking about who has it all. Nobody has it all. Everybody has to pick and choose. It's just, so pick and choose and decide whether it's that soccer game or it's that meeting or whatever. Everybody has to pick and choose. Men pick and choose all the time. I don't think gender played a role for me in necessarily who my mentors were, but they were predominantly men, because that was predominantly who was senior to me at the time.
Awesome. Let's open it up to Q&A right now. Susan.
You just mentioned the decision, do I go to a soccer game or do I go to a meeting? What are your principles, or what have been your principles for?
So the question was, how did I decide, or what were my principles deciding around a soccer game versus working late, whatever. Yeah, right. Oh, yeah, great question. Well, I think it would, revert back predominantly to just how my husband and I had decided to, whether we were dividing up literally that week or that semester or whatever. So there definitely was always coverage, for the kids. Somebody was there. Although I had a village, so sometimes Alex's mom was there for my kids, type thing. So one of the biggest pieces of advice that I heard as a younger person was, and I personally believe this, I think a lot younger children can be nurtured by a very wide variety of caregivers. I mean, if you have any young children in your life, they love everybody, and I was always the more people that love my kids, the better. I never had any issue about, well, they know I'm their mom, and they always knew that I was their mom. I had somebody advise me to save my work flexibility for when they were teenagers. Because I think often women want to stay home when they're little, and and think I'll work when they're older. And that's the one's giving me chills, because I had somebody tell me that, and it just sort of stuck with me. And I can just tell you, for us around middle school, they need a parent present in a way that your best friend can't serve. So yeah, I mean, it was just divvy it up. And I remember a time, schools are notorious, and my oldest daughter's a second grade teacher, so I tell her, don't do this. Schools are notorious, in my opinion, for sending home we're doing this tomorrow, or we're doing this Thursday, on a Tuesday. And it's the working mom's nightmare of, we need this tomorrow. I can remember my daughter having some, mother-daughter tea day with 1 day's notice, and calling my own mom, at 6:30 in the morning. And the minute I heard her voice, I started crying, because I got to be the kid, and I was my mom, and she went to mother-daughter day. So it was on the fly, but organized. What failure am I most proud of? Oh, man. I will say that I have struggled and carried, sort of this baggage about not graduating from college for a long time. And I'm not proud of that necessarily. I do think it's a failure on a certain level. But this is going to be a silly one. Are you ready? The one that I've used the longest. I tried out for cheerleader my junior year and didn't make it, but damn it, I went back and I tried out again my senior year, and I did. So. The question is, how do I feed my soul? So obviously change, over the scope of adulthood, it has changed over time. I love working. It's been harder the last 4 years than ever in my life. I didn't realize how much I loved what I did, and I learned finance as a trade. I kind of jumped over that, but dropped out of school, got a secretarial job, got a junior sales position, had this, looks really organized backwards path to becoming a sales professional, but was totally haphazard and by chance. going forward. I realized that I loved working by filling out, again, having children does ground you. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to be there. Somebody has to be there at 3 o'clock. I remember filling out forms. They often ask what your hobbies are as you're filling out a parent form because they want people to come in who can teach soccer or, whatever. Okay, well, I didn't have any hobbies. I had no hobbies. And it's because I loved public finance. I loved the strategy of the deal. I love reading contracts, which is a weird thing. That set me apart from a lot of people. But there is a quote that comes, it's one of those quotes that I can't figure out who it's attributed to, so I'm not going to attribute it to anybody, but in the spirit of the quote is that if we're lucky in life, an observer won't be able to tell if we're working or we're playing, and that kind of rings true for me. My example, I'd bring home when we still had to print stuff out because I started my profession before there were personal computers. So I'd, print out a federal contract that was that big, and truly at night I loved reading that document, and my mom would be like, oh my God, I can't believe you're doing that. What kind of flipped the switch for me in realizing that work was play for me. It wasn't work, it was play. I had to take off work one day to sign the girls up for some dance class at Parker Dance. I had to stand in line, at 4 o'clock, 7 a.m. on a Friday to get them into this dance class. Okay, and my mom said to me, who's a very supportive person, but different generation, my mom was like, oh, it's so great that you can take off of work and you get this day to play. And okay, standing in that line was drudgery. I did that for my babies, not because I want, So if we're lucky in life, somebody observing us won't be able to tell if we're working or we're playing because they're intertwined.
We have time for one more question.
That's great. Actually, you know what? I wrote things down, and I want to look at them. So, yes, I have an entrepreneurial spirit, and she was asking what my takeaways were, because I had a few things I knew that I wanted to concentrate on. Because I do get asked a fair amount about success, and we've talked a lot about perseverance and just head down, take the next step. I think that I have seen both in myself and then as I was talking to people who mentored me or just observing in YPO, YPO is about lifelong learning, so you have years of seeing different successful people, if you will. And I believe there are 3 characteristics that successful people have that I've observed. And one is they all have saved for retirement. They're all saving. So if you're not in whatever program you guys have offered, start the program now. $50 a month, whatever it is. The other characteristic is they're constantly educating themselves. You're never an expert. You can always go out. So it is that lifelong learning. And then I'm going to look at my third thing. Whew, lost it. Oh, reflection time. They take time. And I think as a younger person, if I told you guys meditate, give me a break. Who has time? Come on, give me a break. But I would say again, this is just a characteristic of people I've found globally to be successful. And successful doesn't mean monetarily necessarily. It means being happy. They take time to reflect. And I think as a younger person, I didn't really know that I was doing this, but I didn't know it was my reflection time, but I would go get massages, probably twice a month. And now looking back, I'm like, okay, there was a lot of thinking going on. So find some time to reflect on what you're doing. Just some quiet time. Or use that as your excuse, yes.
All right, Carol, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today and taking time out of your CEO and your family life. I know it's so busy. As we continue to pursue equality in our careers, it's really important for us to hear from successful women like yourself and give us your advice and your talent and your time. So we appreciate it so much. And thank you, everyone, for coming. We really appreciate it. We look forward to spending the rest of the week with everyone. Tomorrow there is some training focused, IoT, coding, work-life harmony. You can sign up for those online. And then Thursday and Friday we have 2 additional speakers. Same time, same place in this room. The first one is Shreya Nalapati. She founded an AI platform that prevents shootings at just 17, so pretty impressive. And then Friday, we have Franny Matthews, who's the new CEO of the Colorado Tech Association. Seating is going to be open again, so starts at 11:45. And thanks again for joining us, and have a good day.
Thanks for having me. I'm not rushing out of the room, so if anybody has any other...